Hello everyone, welcome to Academy of Sales Services. And now we're coming back to the sessions on the Sri Lankan economic crisis. That means identifying the relevant news is again important. Now they declared emergency because of the largest protest by the people, and how India can help the Sri Lanka was discussed in the news. The result, how the impact of the economic crisis was also discussed. So there are lot of article continuously coming and discussing about the problems of the Sri Lankan crisis. So here we will look into in the factors like the economic crisis. What are the things that an aspirant for UPSC prelims should study? Like as an aspirant, what are the area we should study? Like the Sri Lanka is facing BOP crisis. Then what is BOP crisis? What are trade deficits? What is current account deficits? What is mean by import cover? What is forex? Running inflation, devaluation of the currency, line of credits, currency swap, etc. The facts we need to study. The strategic significance, like Hambatoto port already I have mentioned you, Jaffna projects, which India has gotten like opportunity to investment in projects. Fisherman issue already we in the previous time we have discussed about the fisherman crisis. Some of the like the Chennai port, like the fisherman from the Chennai was like the caught by the Sri Lankan armies at that time. The fisherman like migrating or the fisheries issues, because it's connecting like our like border in this maritime border is with the Sri Lanka. So sometimes there is an issue in the fisherman crisis. Then energy and economic ties, how India is improving, political system, how the Sri Lankan political system is different with India, especially the presidential Westminster. What are the difference between Indians emergency provisions and Sri Lankan emergency provision? Or there could be especially questions on India's emergency provisions. These areas we need to focus, and places of the oceans or seas, or state like Palk Straits, which separate this sea of the like Gulf of near to the Gulf of Mannar, and with the separate the Chennai port and with the Sri Lanka. Then other Jaffna port, Colombo port. Colombo is the news in the context of the big BIMSTEC summits, like the places in the news. Then the international relations organization or the policies. We know that the neighborhood first policy, as part of the neighborhood first policy, we are ready to give financial assistance and cooperation to the Sri Lanka. Then the bodies like International Monetary Fund and their assistance, financial assistance. Then SARC, BIMSTEC were mentioned in the news. India and Sri Lanka ties. What are the projects that India like has with the Sri Lanka? Like the Trincomalee project already we have covered in the previous classes. Then the Jaffna projects and any other project, how India is improving its tie with Sri Lanka. And Tamil issues was major discussions with India and Sri Lanka, like those, and the what are the issues associated with India Sri Lanka ties. Then impact of this economic crisis on like the shortage of fuel, the food shortage, health crisis, medical crisis, etc. These areas will follow. So this is the smartest strategy to study the Sri Lankan economic crisis. And this area we can understand and what are the areas and as aspirant for the prelims examination should prepare. So these are the topic which is relevant that we can expect any question from these areas. Now we'll start before this explaining each and every perspectives. First of all, I would like to explain the current crisis that in the Sri Lanka is facing, that is mainly the BOP crisis, that is the balance of payment. Mainly it is part of our external sector in Indian economy, So these things we can refer to our family itself. Like for an family, for an household, if you think about that, like if they have a lot of money, they think about our house where we have a parents and we have siblings, and think about your family itself, how we are like going through our life, how we are managing our finance. In terms of finance, if you have a lot of money, we can like the planning will be in case of food, we'll have a lot of good food, like including biryani, non-veg will be there. If it is a veg, we'll go for the sadhya or vegetarians, Assamese thali or other thalis. Like better food we will be ordering, or we'll go for shopping and we'll enjoy and we'll have some certain amount of savings. Like it will be the good and condition for house. Like if anything affects the economy of this family because of loss of job of one person or the second person, if they are taking a lot of like the holders of this financial management, if they lost the job, it will affect their income. And finally, if the income is affected, the money which they already having will be reduced. Like that's So the amount of the purchasing the food and other basic needs and the shopping will be reduced, and they will change their pattern of life into a different way. And so they will reduce the consumption, they will never go for the shopping, etc. Then other cases, if that continue for a longer term or longer period, then it will be a crisis, like a poverty crisis. There is no food, then they will be shifted to any other, like in Kerala we have called as kanji, say this, the kind of water mixed with the rice. That will be another kind of food they will only follow. There is no any biryani, no any other items will be in the food. They will never go for anything. They will ask for people to give some money through the debts, like they will ask for somebody to finance them in order to purchase the basic needs. So this is the kind of same things happen with any country, same happen with any business, same happen with any industries, any persons. So this is what the crisis that Sri Lanka is facing, the BOP crisis, that the economic growth of the Sri Lankan or the country is going down, as well as its products, that means the GDP or national product is also not that much producing, or it's going down, and it does not have any money to purchase anything from the abroad, like food. In order to purchase food, there is no money, and in order to purchase the fuel or petrol, diesel, it does not have money, and it's also have a lot of debt with the other countries or neighboring countries or international bodies. So that means that the BOP crisis means export is too much low and import is very much high. And in order to, like, there are a lot of debt crises also there. There are a lot of debt with other countries. That means deep debt with many of the countries that you can see in the PPT. The largest borrowing of the Sri Lanka is mainly on the sovereign bond. So the concepts in these areas we need to focus. What is sovereign bond? So sovereign bond is a kind of debt instrument which mainly the government will issue if there is no money. The debt instruments, which is called as bond, will be issued to someone, and with the long term they will have an agreement that I will pay after 10 years with a fixed amount of every year, like the 1,000 or 200 for like getting, or 10,000 or 1 lakh, like that. So in order to get a money, in order to get to finance certain things for the government issue a debt instrument called as bond to in the private or the open market, in the domestic, in the form of domestic currency or a foreign currency. So Sri Lanka, they do not have any money. So in order to finance their fiscal deficit, or in order to purchase any import from other countries, they have issued this bond to this in this domestic currency or in the form of foreign currency in the foreign exchange market or markets, in the open market economies. So they, through that, they are getting a lot of money from the private investment maybe. So this, with that amount, they have like managed till now. But now they have to pay back a lot of this amount every year. They have to pay a lot of amount to this like the creditors which are, they have given the money to the government. So this is what the crisis that this Lanka is facing, and the largest borrowing of that Lanka is having on international sovereign bond. That means mainly they have borrowed the money from the international market and used by the foreign currency exchange. That means the sovereign bond was mainly on the based on the foreign currency. The international sovereign bond is the largest borrowing that's in the Sri Lanka has taken. So they have to pay back. But in order to pay back also, they do not have any money in their hand. That means POP crisis happening now, because the amount of the money which the Sri Lanka has in the forex is very less, or it's diminishing trends. And whatever the remaining amount they has is mainly going for the repayment of the debt, not for any like purchasing of the import, or for any capital investment or capital infrastructure or capital expenditures. This is what happening with this Sri Lanka now. So the largest amount of borrowing that Sri Lanka is now on mainly on the international sovereign bond. That's why in the prelims we can expect a question. One area is in the economy is the sovereign bond or BOP, balance of payment. We have mainly the calculation on export and import, like the how much export that in, like we have seen that export that India's like achieved, how many import that India's, like India also facing the same things, that our export is much lower than the import. Like import is much higher. That means import, if you are importing anything, we have to pay for that. If anything we are exporting, we are getting a revenue. That means if the revenue is high and the payment, that expenditure is low, that means we say the BOP, the balance of payment, is a trade surplus. That means trade is better and grows. But if it is opposite side, that means export is low, that means revenue is low, and the import is high, then it is called as we are paying a lot and expenditure is too much. That means expenditure is high over the revenue. That means import is too much, or import is more than the export. So it's BOP crisis, we call it as trade deficit. This is what the Lanka is facing. In their cases, too much gap is there. Export is almost below and the import is too much high. But they do not have a money to purchase also. So when they do not have any money to purchase, that they have kept it in the forex reserve is somewhat like near to zero. This is what is happening with the Sri Lanka. They are in an economic crisis. The second largest borrowing or the lender for the Sri Lanka was Asian Development Bank. When any government, if they have a short of fund, they will also ask any international bank like any regional bank like Asian Development Bank or Asian Infrastructure Bank or IMF, World Bank. We have seen that lot of international and regional development banks are there. So another loan that Sri Lanka has taken from Asian Development Bank, which is a regional development bank. The second largest lender of the Sri Lanka is the Asian Development Bank, which almost consistent consumed like the 14.6%, and in the case of sovereign bond, it is 36.4%. So then we need to study about if they have the second largest borrower or lender is the Asian Development Bank, then we need to study what is Asian Development Bank. Another area of questions can come with regard to Asian Development Bank as a regional bank, as an international institution. Asian Development Bank is established in 1966 on December 19th, and it is headquartered in the Philippines, Manila city, and it is also an official observer to the United Nations. Now, currently it has 68 members. Already, I think UPSC have asked one question with regard to Asian Development Bank. So then this year also we can expect a question about the ADB, the Asian Development Bank. Currently, they has like the 68 members are part of the Asian Development Bank, including Sri Lanka. Remember that Sri Lanka is a member, and they also got a lot of loan from the Asian Development Bank, and it is the second largest lender to the Sri Lanka. They have to pay back the amount, and 49 from the within the Asia. That means even the name which suggests Asian Development Bank, any country outside Asia can also be the member of Asian Development Bank. In a statement, we can expect that it will say only the Asian countries can only be the member of Asian Development Bank. If that statements come, we should understand that is wrong. We know that the membership in the composition or the members within the organization, we know that there are total 68, that means below 100, and 49 are only from the Asia and remaining are outside Asia, including US is also part of the Asian Development Bank. Then another questions can come, the largest shareholder, like based on the capital they have investment in the Asian Development Bank. That means with largest shareholder of the ADB, we can have a list of country, and sometime in prelims, there could be questions, which of the following has the largest shareholding with the ADB? That kind of questions can also come. In an order, you can see that Japan is the highest. Japan is the highest or the largest shareholder, followed by US, then the China, then India, and India is ranking this fourth. India is the fourth largest shareholder of the ADB. That could be another statement. And Australia is also part of this ADB, and they are the fifth. They are the fifth largest shareholder. So the Japan, US, China, India, Australia are the 5 largest shareholder of the Asian Development Bank. So these institutions, study about this institution, the model which that ADB is followed the same with the World Bank, and proportion of the members' capital and subscription is what their major, like their voting system is also going according to the capital, the subscription which the members has, accordingly they are following the voting right aspect. That is what the World Bank is following. So that means statement can also come, it is following the model of the World Bank in terms of the voting rights of the members. So that is again right. So Asian Development Bank, the headquarters, it is an official observer to the UN, the members, the shareholders, etc. The fact can be a questions. Sovereign bond, it is a bond, a specific debt instrument issued by a government to get a money to finance certain deficits. If they have a BOP deficit, if they have a the fiscal deficit, that means expenditure is too high and the revenue is very low, and they have a lot of money required to pay back the payment or the debt. So in order to finance those things, they are like borrowing money from the markets through a debt instrument which is called as bond, mainly introduced by issued by the government in the form of either in the foreign currency or domestic currency. Mostly in India, we are following, like we are also issuing sovereign bond mainly on domestic currency. Sometimes if that require, we will go for foreign currency like sovereign bonds. That means international sovereign bond. But in the case of Sri Lanka has a lot of borrowing through the sovereign bond. Through that, they have borrowed a lot of money in order to finance their expenditure, like etc., and also pay back the money. But finally, they went up a crisis. They have a lot of money to pay back. A deep debt crisis happening in Sri Lanka. And other countries that they have to pay back, including Japan and China, which they have 10.9 for Japan and 10.8% for the China. They have to pay back the money. And after the Japan and China, the next country is coming India. India also give a lot of money to the Sri Lanka as a creditor. So Sri Lanka also borrowed. That means Sri Lanka borrowed money from India as well. 1.4 billion is what the India's lent to Sri Lanka that has to pay back to India. After that also, in like Sri Lanka is asking for more, especially they have asked for $1 billion more from India for financial assistance in order to address this economic crisis that Sri Lanka is facing now. That means India is also has to get a lot of money from the Sri Lanka. But now the Lanka does not have any money in their own hand to pay back this debt to the sovereign bond, to the Asian Development Bank, or to Japan, China, or India. Now they are seeking a lot of financial assistance from other countries. And we know that during the pandemic time, including India's economy also affected. Similarly, the Lanka's economy also affected. That way they do not have any productive activities happened in the recent time. It's affected their growth. It affected their national products. That means their income is so much like affected by the pandemic, and after followed by they couldn't recover the economy. It has affected their BOP, the balance of payment. These are the concepts that we need to follow. So now we will look at the historical and the other factors, how this crisis, how the Sri Lanka went upon this crisis. What are the factors that led to the economic crisis of the Sri Lanka? Mainly the geological factors, we can say in 2004, the tsunami. The Sri Lanka is an island country, mostly prone to these disasters like tsunami, or even could be the result of the earthquake can affect the Sri Lanka. So in 2004, we know that there was a tsunami. It is mainly affected the region of Sri Lanka in 24. And because of that, it is affected, it has to boost a lot of investment for rebuilding the country. If a country is affected by disaster, we already know that some of the countries like Assam, even including Kerala, and some our the coastal regions may be affected by disaster. In that cases, we need to pool a lot of money in order to rebuild those cities or those regions. Similarly, the Sri Lanka was affected by the tsunami, and the government has to start a rebuilding strategy. A lot of public expenditure has to be spent on that in order to rebuild the Sri Lanka backs. So this has resulted in falling the private investment, the taxes of the GDP. That means whatever if the private investment is less, if this growth of the private sector is very less, that means the share of taxes to the GDP will be falling down. That means the revenue collection, a government is getting mainly on through the taxes. That means tax revenue through the GST, that India is also getting a lot of revenue collection. And there was a news about the GST collection. And this is the highest collection that we got recently. So like that, any country, if there is a reduction in the tax collection, it also affect their income of the country. So if there is a fall in the private investment, it will affect the share of taxes. This was already in the crisis that Sri Lanka faced during 2006 and 7, and government was only the area that has to finance a lot of investment through the foreign borrowing. In order to make active in the economic area or industrial activities, they borrow foreign money, foreign currencies, or they welcomed a lot of foreign investment in that country. That means government started financing a lot of money, and they started a lot of international sovereign bond like the $500 million in 2007. In 2007, they have started borrowing sovereign bond in the form of foreign currency, because in order to finance and in order to boost their economy, in order to finance this crisis which the government is facing, they have started borrowing a lot of money through the international sovereign bond since 2007. And then the political factors, if you look back, how the system of the government was functioned in Sri Lanka. In 1947, when India was also got independence in 1947, Sri Lanka is not completely independent that time. It was in 1947, the Sri Lanka was known as Ceylons. It was considered as a constitutional monarchy under the control of British. The British governor of Ceylon was the Governor General, and he was the head of the government at that time. It was replaced only in 1972. In 1972, the Sri Lanka became a republic country, or declared itself as a republic and monarchy. And all the previous monarchy, the constitutional monarchy, was removed. Now, in 1972, if you calculate the year 1972 with 2022, this is the 50th anniversary that Sri Lanka got republic. Again, Sri Lanka is important for us. In 1972, after this 1947 Ceylon and the Governor General control of the British, finally in 1972, Sri Lanka declared republic. A new republican constitution was formed, and they have followed a parliamentary republic at that time in 1972. But later, there was an amendment has been made in 1972. They have changed the parliamentary form of government, that is also called as Westminster system, which is in the British government, with that the British government is following. The Westminster system of parliamentary government was followed by Sri Lanka in 1972, has changed through an amendment in 1972 to the presidential system. Now you can see that whenever any news comes, they are discussing about the President Gotabaya. That means Gotabaya Rajapaksa is the current president of Sri Lanka, and the Sri Lanka is currently following a system based on the French presidency. The presidential system of government is followed in the Sri Lankan governance or the government. Earlier, it was Westminster system, that in this following parliamentary system, that the Westminster system, what we call in the Britain, the Westminster form of system, the parliamentary system that India is following, the US is following presidential form of system. Sri Lanka adopted the model of French presidency system. So in polity, in your Lashmigan, please revise this fact about what are the factors and features of parliamentary system of government, what are the features of presidential form of government or president system of government. Sri Lanka is one of the example. Now, the president, we know that the Sri Lanka, both the head of the state and both the head of the government is the president. Yes, president is the head of the state, head of the government in India is the prime minister. But in the case of the Sri Lanka, both the head of the state and head of the government is presidents. And there is a cabinet minister and prime minister also there in Sri Lanka, and they will advise, like according to their advice, the president will act. But president has more power in Sri Lanka. This is what the system that Sri Lanka is currently following. That the Sri Lanka is a semi-presidential representative democratic republic system which they are following. President of Sri Lanka is the head of both the state as well as the government, and executive functions of the government is mainly done by this president, and other things according to the advice of the minister, the prime minister and the cabinet ministers, they will do the act. They'll act according to that. This is what the system of Sri Lanka is following. If you look back to the historic, the political background of Sri Lanka from 1990s, you can see that Chandrika Kumaratunga was the president of the Sri Lanka from 1994 to 2004. Around, I think, 14 years of this continued like the power which was ordered by Chandrika Kumaragupta. After that, the power was taken by Mahinda Rajapaksa from 2005 to 2015. Almost 10 to 11 years was ruled or was controlled by the Mahinda Rajapaksa government. He was the former president, and also currently the prime minister of the Sri Lanka is the Mahinda Rajapaksa. He continued from 2005 to 2015 during this crisis. We know that the tsunami has affected the Sri Lanka in 2004. After that, the government has changed because the tsunami has affected all the government of the Sri Lanka. So they are also continued for the 3 to 4 terms, and later the government changed and it was headed by the Mahinda Rajapaksa in 2015. Then the another government was under the Maithripala Sirisena from 2015 to 2019. That means when the first prime minister, when the NDA government, when they have ruled in the first time, and now the NDA is in the second time in India. During the first time of the NDA, in the Sri Lanka, it was ruled by Maitri Pala Sirisena from 2015 and 2019. Since 2019, again government change. It is now under the presidency of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Is also the brother of the Mahinda Rajapaksa. Again, another one more example of controlling the government by a family, or an example of dynastic politics like in Sri Lanka. The president of the Sri Lanka is Gotabaya. You can see in the image the right side, which is Gotabaya Rajapaksa is the president of the Sri Lanka now, and the prime minister, which is a former the president of this Lanka, now he is the president of the prime minister of the Sri Lanka is the Mahinda Rajapaksa. Earlier, before the prime minister was another person, but the government removed the previous president and replaced it with the Mahinda Rajapaksa. Both are brothers. It's again another example of the dynastic politics. We can use it in the mains examination, but in the global level, and it's an example of the Sri Lankan political system. And Sri Lanka, we also know that it's a multi-party system where who is having the majority, they will form the government. So under the presidency form of the government, the president is Gotabaya Rajapaksa. That's why most of the protests you can see against the president Gotabaya to resign in a crisis. And the location, you can see the map of the Sri Lanka here, and in the green background, you can see the green color. It's marked the eastern areas where the two communities, the two divided communities can be seen in Sri Lankan in populations. Especially this is also a political issues in the Sri Lanka. One is the Sinhala community. 75%, that means majority of the Lankan community is Sinhala, mainly the Hindus and Buddhist communities. And there are few like the minorities also, including Christians and Muslims. And major other parts are the Tamil community. They are living in the eastern parts of all these greens is marked as the Tamil groups who are living in the Sri Lanka. 75%. So this also has influence on their political system of Sri Lanka. Like their politics also influenced based on the interest of the majority, and most of these leaders will support on the Sinhala community or the majority community. Sometimes it has neglected the part of the interest of the Tamil group, and finally it led to a civil war in 2009. Another crisis that Sri Lanka was faced after the tsunami was the civil war in 2009. We have heard about Tamil Tigers, LTTE. India was also given assistance to address these problems of civil war. This has become another issue of the bilateral ties with India and Sri Lanka. This was the civil war. Again, why this was resulted? Because of the one particular minority community, the Tamil groups demanded an independent state out of the Sri Lanka because they were neglected in all the political spheres and socio-economic perspectives, and majority of the interest was protected the Sinhalas by the government. So that way, finally, this Tamil group or the groups formed a militant as well, and they were fought in order to get an independence and led to the civil war from within the Sri Lanka. This was happened in the 2009. It's also affected the government in financially, economically, and other matters. So they also has to work on reconstruction after the civil war. They have to rework on their economy. They have to re-establish a good society. They have to address the civil war challenges and their security challenges in these areas in 2009. This is what happened in Sri Lanka. And one major sector that the Sri Lanka has income or the revenue was on this tourism sector. The mainly people are coming to Sri Lanka is because of their tourist attractions, and major revenue of the government is this tourism sector. And we know that because of the pandemics, tourism has affected a lot, the lockdown, all the things, the first pandemic, the first COVID wave, the second COVID wave, India also experienced the same things, affected our tourism sector. Lot of doses was happened after the impact on the tourism sector. So one of the major areas that Sri Lanka has on the revenue is mainly on the tourism sector. Because of the pandemic, COVID pandemic, it has a large hit on the tourism sector. It has affected their income, mainly the key source of the foreign exchange. That means foreign money or the foreign investment or foreign currency which coming to Sri Lanka is mainly on the tourism sector. If that is completely shut down during the pandemic and lockdown, again, no foreign exchange or sources is coming to Sri Lanka. It has affected the Sri Lanka's economy, especially on the BOP crisis. There are other countries also dependent on the tourism sector like the Malaysia and Indonesia. But after the tsunami effect on these regions, they understood that only depending on tourism sector will never help a country to grow. So they also diversified their sector into different sectors, including like Malaysia and Indonesia, learned a lot from their mistakes and they have changed. But Sri Lanka didn't change or didn't even try to diversify their sectors. They still were dependent only on this tourism sector. So that way the pandemic has affected a lot on Sri Lankan economy. They couldn't come back like India or other countries. It also has shown another data that there is a declining in remittance like NRIs, that India has a large number of, India also a large number of NRIs. So the remittance that's coming to Sri Lanka from abroad is also declining in the trends after pandemic. We have seen that a lot of people working abroad also lost the job. Many countries also experienced the economic crisis. So this has resulted a reduction in the coming of the foreign currencies, foreign exchange to Sri Lanka. That's the reduction of the remittance is coming from abroad to the Sri Lanka. That means it has resulted the declining of the remittance will affect on the foreign exchange or balance of payment in the economy. And job losses, of course, India also experienced an unemployment. A lot of people are experiencing this loss of jobs in India as well. So Sri Lanka is also part of like affected on these job losses is there. So if there is a lot of job losses, income also will be reduced or income will also be go down. This has an effect on the life of the people. There's a shortage of the things. They cannot purchase anything. Basic amenities will be like they cannot afford it. This can result into or affect into the life of the people. And all these factors resulted into the forex crisis. In India, we also have a forex reserve. This forex reserve is like kept by the Reserve Bank of India. RBI is keeping India's forex reserve. So in this case, most of the countries, the central bank will keep this forex reserve. That means forex reserve may include a foreign currency. That means in the currency form. Another form is the gold. In India, RBI is following the 4 items in the forex reserve. One is the highest one is the foreign currency, mainly dollar, money, etc. Then another one is the gold. They're also like keeping this gold as a forex reserve. Then another one is the IMF, the quotas which we have given, like the gold trench. Then we have the special drawing rights with the IMF, the special drawing, gold trench with IMF, gold, as well as the foreign currency are four forex reserve that's kept by Reserve Bank of India for India. Now India has like a lot of forex reserve with the RBI. With this forex reserve, India can buy around 10 or 11 months of imports. That's what mean by import cover. Import cover means that how many months a forex reserve can purchase. That means India's forex reserve is with the RBI in the form of foreign currency, in the form of gold, in the form of special drawing rights, in the form of gold trench. All these concepts you will study in economy, external sector. I hope if you have studied it, it would please revise those concepts. So India's forex reserve with RBI, Reserve Bank of India. With this forex reserve that India has can buy around import for 11 months if there is no money. That much reserve that India has. But in the case of the economy of the Sri Lanka, almost last 2 years, they have lost around 70% of the forex reserve with their central bank. That means their forex reserve, the strength of the government is almost going down. That means they do not have any sufficient money in the saving or forex reserve to buy or to purchase anything from other countries. That means import. If anything coming for import, like in order to purchase a petrol or in order to purchase a medicine or in order to purchase any the grains or food from India itself, it does not have any money to pay back or to purchase those import. It does not have any money. So, and they have to buy or ask any financial assistance from any country to help them. That's what the Sri Lanka is experiencing. 70% of this foreign exchange reserve with the Sri Lanka is almost going down. That's why they are struggling, and whatever the amount they has with the forex reserve is going to for the repayment of the debt. That means this much borrowing they have like got from many countries, including ADB, as well as the other sovereign board, they have to pay back all this money. So with the reserve, they can only pay back those money. Even that is not sufficient. This is what the Sri Lanka is experiencing. The data is also shown in the PPT. The country is left with the foreign reserve of only around $2.31 billion as of February, even as its face debt to payment is about $4 billion. $4 billion is the debt, and only the reserve which the government is only, that is below the 400 billion, $4 billion, $2.31 billion is the reserve which that Sri Lanka has by the February, the last February, and it's also above this, like debt is also above that. That means the crisis, the government is under crisis. That means a forex crisis experienced by this Lanka. And another policy that government has taken in 2021 was like in order to promote organic farming, they have banned use of the chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Even in importing this chemical and fertilizer, pesticide also need to be paid a lot of money. We know that government does not have any money reserved in the forex reserve with the central bank. Even though if it need to be, if it want to import a lot of chemical fertilizer or pesticide, it has to pay back to those countries. And if does not have any money to pay for the import, what it has done was it has banned import of chemical fertilizer and pesticide, and instead it has promoted every farmer should use or promote organic farming. No, any farmers can use any chemical fertilizer and pesticide, and country will never import any chemical fertilizer and pesticide at that time, because it does not have any money to purchase the chemical fertilizer or pesticide from outside the country. In order to conserve whatever the forex reserve they has, what they did, what they have banned the use of the chemical fertilizer and pesticide. So impact was, it has affected the production of the agriculture. It resulted in the shortage of food, and it's also increased the prices of the food. That means supplies was disrupted, and demand is also there, and food shortage is happening. Because if there is a reduction, like if it has affected the usage of chemical fertilizer and pesticide, if the farmer will be affected. If they have promoting organic farming without any scientific measures, it will affect the agriculture economy. This is what again a crisis was happening in Sri Lanka, and finally after 6 months of this ban, they have government revoked this ban, and they have understood the crisis. It also led to many protests in Sri Lanka. It has mainly affected the farmers, and finally government has assured many recovery loans to these farmers and many financial assistance to these farmers because of this false decision in economy, or especially agriculture policies. This also triggered the economic crisis of Sri Lanka, and mainly the promoting organic farming by banning the import and use of the chemical fertilizer and pesticide. The rationale behind the ban of the pesticide and chemical utilizers was it does not have any money to purchase the chemical fertilizer or pesticide. It was conserving the forex reserve at that time through the bans. That's what the government was doing at that time. And now the crisis, you can see the many images in the newspaper was discussing about people in the queue in the petrol pump, people in the queue for getting the LPGs or the basics, the energy, or the like LPG gases and other fuels. That means the country is experiencing a shortage of fuel. That means that the country does not have any money to purchase any fuels, any energy or fuel from other abroad or any other countries. That means it's resulting to the shortage of fuel. That means the demand is high. The country cannot supply that much amount of fuel to achieve or to equalize that demands. So there are people still demanding the amount of the fuel, especially the petrol, even for cooking purposes, all this, the fuel is required. But there is a, like government is like banned or stopped importing the fuel. So whatever the fuel is now currently has with the Sri Lanka, they have to manage with that. So it can resulting into a large number of long queue in the cities. This has affected the life of the people. Then power supply is also affected. Last 2-3 days, you can see that there is a march and protest against the government, and they were like protesting towards the residents of the President Gotabaya, because the government declared that a daily power cuts like around extended to 10 to 11 hours of power cut in a day. That what will happen now? Even half an hour or 15 minutes power cut cannot be like acceptable for us, or even 1 hour or 2 hour cannot be acceptable for us. So if a country is like going through the 10 to 11 hours of the power cut, what will be effect on the peoples? because there is a shortage of fuel, that you can see that more than 40% of the Sri Lankan electricity is generated by the hydro, and most of these reservoir running like with the this kind of like affected by the shortage of rain. That means climate effect is also there. Then the shortage of fuel, like coal and oil are the major components of the country for the electric production. And if there is a shortage of the fuel, if the government cannot import any fuel, the power cannot be generated, or the electricity cannot be generated. That means shortage of the power, electricity resources, energy resources. So the government has to reserve energy. So for that, government said that there will be 10 to 11 hours of power cuts in the country. So this also disrupted the life of the people in that. That's why the people are protesting against the government. Again, the inflation, the concept with regard to inflation coming here. The Colombo in March 20th imposed a broad important ban to save the foreign currency and widespread the shortage of essential goods, and there is a sharp rise in the price of rices. That means the currency of the Sri Lankan currency is like value of this Sri Lankan currency diminishing now. Now they have to, for in order to purchase a tea, that means a chai in Sri Lanka, it will cost around 100 rupees. It was in October last year, it was just rupees 25, because of the diminishing the value of the Sri Lankan currency. Because if the economy does not have any growth, the value of the currency also will go down. That we call in terms of in economy devaluation of the currency. The Sri Lankan central bank devaluated by rupees by 15%. The central bank of the Sri Lanka with immediate effects is exchange rate limit 230 rupees. That means the current value of with the dollar, it's around 230 or 200 around is the equal to dollar. India is around 75 rupees with the dollar. That means if you check in the Google how much India's rupees equal to dollar, the calculations. So similarly, the value of the Sri Lanka is going down. It's around 230. That means 15% is down. The devaluation of the currency has happened. The tea in Sri Lanka, it's now cost around 100 rupees. It can also affect the life of the people. That means people need a lot of money to consume a basic things. Doctor visits, medicine, to purchase a medicine, also like increase the expenditure. So the pocket of expenditure, out pocket expenditure also increasing. So nobody will go to hospital. Nobody will go consult a doctor. Nobody will go for purchasing any medicine. They will do something in themselves, self-medication they will follow. According to WHO, this can also lead to higher morbidity if people follow themselves the self-medication. So this can result into morbidity, health crisis, health emergency crisis can also another problem. And many hospitals in Sri Lanka, you have heard about that, they have stopped the surgeries which there has to be done in the cities, in the countries. So many hospitals in Sri Lanka stopped surgeries because of lack of shortage of the equipments, shortage of essential medicines. Supermarket also forced to ration staple foods and including rice and sugar, milk, power. So all these, the shutting down of these, the basic amenities or the hospital basic services has affected the life of the people. There's a shortage of power. Even it has affected the education, the shortage of paper, because there are a lot of examination has to be conducted in the Sri Lanka, but because of the shortage of paper, it has cancelled all the examination of the students in Sri Lanka. Another impact on education of the students, education of the masses in the Sri Lanka. Then many of the people, if they cannot live in Sri Lanka, they're also moving to another country. The near country is India. The bordering country is India. You have seen that this image. How many of you have seen this image? People from Sri Lanka moving to or migrating to India, especially to Chennai. The Chennai port, this family was moved from Sri Lanka to, in order to escape from the Sri Lanka, they've reached and the army of India has caught them. And this was happened, this can happen, the refugee crisis, another future crisis that the world is going to face is the refugee crisis of the Sri Lanka, because economic crisis, because people cannot afford the basic things, basic including the food or the clothes, the basics, the services, sanitation or anything, even including health, they cannot afford it. If they cannot afford it, they will move from the cities or the country. So the refugee crisis is another issue. Is what the Sri Lanka is facing now. And then the inflation is happening in Sri Lanka. It's around 15.5% of the inflation of the current Sri Lanka is experiencing. India's inflation rate is around 6 to 7%, and Pakistan inflation rate is around 8%. So any countries, if you check any country's inflation, it has certain percentage, a percentage of level of price is mentioned. about their inflation trend. So in the case of Sri Lanka, they are experiencing a rise of price around 15%. So we have a concept in the inflation, that is types of inflation according to the rise of the prices. You can see that 4 types of inflation here. One is creeping inflation, second is walking or trotting inflation, or another one is running inflation, and another is hyperinflation or runaway inflation or galloping inflation. These are the 4 types of inflation on the basis of the rise of the price on the basis of percentage. The first one is the creeping inflation. The first and foremost type of inflation is the creeping inflation, which is a rise of the price. That means the value of the price rise at the slow rate of the less than 3%. If a price rises below the 3%, it is called as creeping inflation, which is, say, an essential for economic growth. An inflation is slow rate of increase in the price level or small amount of inflation is a good for a country. That means it can help an economic growth of the country. That's why creeping inflation is a safe core country and essential for an economic growth. Now currently countries like US, UK, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, all of these countries are experiencing an inflation rate below the 3%. That means a certain percentage of inflation is good for an economy. If it is no inflation, it will go a stagnant basis or it will go down, then it will result in deflation. There is another different concept is also there with regard to inflation. So one of the first type of with regard to the rise of price is the creeping inflation. The stage is less than 3%. The country like India and Pakistan is experiencing the second type, that is walking or trotting inflation. Now we are also experiencing a rise of prices or inflation in India. That means rising price at the moderate level of 3 to 7% or less than 10%. If any country is experiencing a rise of the price below the 10% or between 3 to 7%, that means above 3%, that means above 3% to 7 or less than 10, these countries experiencing inflation will be called as walking trotting inflation. So trotting inflation is refers to that kind of ABC type questions can come. So 3 to 7 or less than 10% is walking or trotting inflation. This is a warning signal that the central bank like RBI has to make a policy to control that rise of this price or inflation. If it does not control, it will affect the economy, resulting to another state that is called a running inflation. Now the Sri Lanka is experiencing the inflation, which is the running inflation, the rising price rapidly between 10 to 20%. That's why a chai in Sri Lanka, which will cost 100 rupees, even in now Assam, in the Assamese thalis will cost rupees 100. So you can equate how it is different in India and Sri Lanka. They have to pay 100 rupees for a tea. That's what they affecting when it is the price of the price or the diminishing the value of the currency. So running inflation is a type of inflation which is rising the price very rapidly between 10 to 20%. It will mainly affect economy adversely. That's why the Sri Lanka is facing an economic crisis where there is a shortage of diminishing the value of currency. People cannot afford their basic things including food. That is the kind of running inflation. So in question we can expect what is running inflation. What is defined by running inflation? Please refer to these things. Hyperinflation is the last and the fourth stage. Hyperinflation, or it is also called as runaway inflation or galloping inflation. All these three words are same. That means any country is experiencing a rise of price much very faster, double or triple digits between above 20% till 100% or more than 50%, like above the 50 or 20 to 100% of the rise of the price. Those countries we can say they are experiencing a hyperinflation or runaway inflation or galloping inflation. The countries examples here are Venezuela as well as Sudan. These two countries also experiencing the same situation of the hyperinflation or galloping inflation or runaway inflation. The Venezuela's, the current percentage is around more than 600. 686% or percentage is experienced by Venezuela. Sudan, you can see the second largest country experiencing the hyperinflation, that is around 340.0%. These are the examples of the countries experiencing hyperinflation. That means above 20 to 100%, if any country is experiencing, they are called as, they are experiencing hyperinflation. Now currently Sri Lanka is experiencing running inflation. We cannot say if the Sri Lanka falls down, it can also, like in next stage, it can also experience hyperinflation. So this type of inflation can be a prelims question that no news has directly mentioned. But when there is a discussion of inflation in the Sri Lanka, that what mean that running inflation is discussed. So in our economic concept, we have to study running inflation and other types of inflation. That please keep in mind. So this is finally resulting into economic crisis. Forex result, the current economic growth of the Sri Lanka, you can see this lower than what is expected, 1.8% in the fourth quarter of 2021 financial year. And forex shortage, because of these forex reserves in short, they are demanding a lot of money, a financial assistance from other country. And one method they can do is the government to government loan. That India and Sri Lanka, India and China, or India and UK, or India and Germany, or any India, Japan, or like Sri Lanka, Japan, India, Sri Lanka, China, like that you have seen that. China is also giving financial assistance to Sri Lanka. India is also giving financial assistance to Sri Lanka. All these are government to government loan. With this, they are going to address this forex shortage in Sri Lanka. And another one is the currency swap and with the foreign central bank. Recently, the RBI of India also has given a financial assistance to through the currency swaps. So in prelims, we can expect a question on what is currency swap. So currency swap is also another kind of financial assistance is given to the Sri Lanka. The currency swap is a instruments that Sri Lanka will give back to the RBI in a local currency of its own in exchange of a foreign currency. That means RBI will give Sri Lanka in the foreign currency form, like in the form of foreign currency. In return, RBI will get a Sri Lankan local currency. So that means RBI is accepting to like give this exchange of the currency for like the local currency of the Sri Lankan currency will be exchanged in form of the foreign currency with the RBI. This is what the currency swap. One way is the government to government loan through the credit line. We have seen line of credits. India has given assistance to Sri Lanka through the line of credits, that is called a loan. A soft loan has been given to Sri Lanka, government to government loan. Another method is currency swap. That means in order to purchase import or in order to pay back the foreign debt, they need a foreign currency. So foreign currency, they can ask any financial borrow like the bank of any other country, including India, they have asked, and RBI has given this currency swap to Sri Lanka. So that in exchange of like local currency, in exchange of the foreign currency, then it was also sought. Finally, earlier it didn't sought any financial assistance from the International Monetary Fund. Why a government is not willing to ask for any financial assistance? Do you know why any country is not going for any financial assistance from IMF? Is there any reason why Sri Lanka has not tried it before? Why they were asking for any financial assistance with any country? Somebody know? Please comment in the box. Okay, leave it if nobody knows. Means IMF, if you are borrowing any money from IMF have a certain policy like structural adjustment program. That means IMF has a certain policies. If any country is like ready to accept their financial assistance, if any country is seeking any financial assistance, IMF will give that amount to address that problem. But there is a certain condition that this country has to follow what the IMF would say. That means IMF would say your economy 60% must be private and 40% must be public. Like that, there are certain conditions would be telling by the IMF, and this country, in order to get the money, it has to follow the terms and conditions of IMF. That means IMF will intervene the financial matters of the country, and finally it will affect the holistic the economic background of that economy. This is what happened with India also in 1991. Before 1991, we know that India was mainly on the public sector or public investment. Because of the BOP crisis, when we were in a debt, we have accepted the financial assistance of IMF. Then we changed our economic policy into open economy. That means liberalization, privatization, globalization. Since then, a lot of private investment and private inflows were came to India. It has benefited in terms, some term, it also degraded an other sector. That means IMF interference was came after that. The same things, Sri Lanka in the before, now recently they only started asking for financial assistance from IMF. So the immediate response of Sri Lanka didn't preferred any financial assistance from the IMF, because if we are seeking any financial assistance from the IMF, it would mean that IMF will interfere the matters of the economy of that country, or the political matters also will be affected. That's why the Sri Lanka didn't prefer for asking any financial assistance from the IMF. Now they cannot manage with these loans from any other country. They cannot depend on this only the solution. So finally, they also sought a financial assistance from the IMF. Now India is helping. A lot of financial assistance has been given with the RBI, which has announced $400 billion as of Currencies Swap with the Sri Lanka, as well as 500 billion the line of credit also given to Sri Lanka for purchasing the fuel from abroad in order to address the shortage of fuel. And we also extended our assistance to Sri Lanka $1 billion for importing essential like goods like the foods and medicine for the, it will help the people of the Sri Lanka. As a humanitarian perspective also, India were ready to give a lot of credits to Sri Lanka, even though Sri Lanka has to pay back a lot of amount to India. That means Sri Lanka has already taken a lot of money from India, it has to pay back, but instead of even they have a lot of money payback, India ready to give again the financial assistance. India has extended the financial assistance in order to purchase the food and medicines. That means it is improving. The Sri Lanka is also improving the ties with India. Earlier, they were tried to diversify the ties with China. They were balancing India-China relationship, but they understood that China was like following a debt trap diplomacy. It also affected their economy because the Hambantota port they have given to Sri Lanka because they have given to China because of the debt issues. But India is not a country. India is not following any neo-colonialist approach in the diplomatic relations. So it is better to keep India as a good friend rather than the China. That's what the Sri Lanka understood now. So now the future policies of the Sri Lanka will help India to make a good ties with the Sri Lanka. In the mains, we can also use these points. Now, India and Sri Lanka ties also improving. It can also help India to address the problems of the Tamil people who are living in the Sri Lanka in the future, near future. So these are the areas that we need to focus in the Sri Lankan economic crisis. Thank you all.